Whispers on Steel, Book 1 of the Railway Inheritance. Written by Melody Gilley. Chapter 14. The sound of Sullivan's Jaguar faded down the long driveway, silence settling over whispering pines like a heavy cloak. Sonya remained in the kitchen until she was certain he had truly departed, then began methodically exploring potential escape routes. The garage would be her first target, examining the motorcycle and Morris Minor for keys and assessing their viability as transportation options. Her path took her past Sullivan's study, the door left slightly ajar in his haste to prepare for the evening's railway operations. A practical strategy suggested searching the room for car keys, perhaps money she might need for her escape plan. Yet something beyond practicality drew her toward the partially open door. Curiosity about the man whose protection both confined and sheltered her, whose poem had revealed vulnerability beneath calculated control. The study looked different in fading afternoon light. Shadows gathered in corners, dust motes danced in amber beams slanting through leaded windows. Sullivan's desk remained meticulously organized despite his hasty departure, documents arranged in precise stacks, fountain pens aligned in their holder. The letter bearing her name had disappeared, though his poem remained partially visible beneath the leather ledger where she'd discovered it earlier. Sonya moved toward the desk, intending to search drawers for keys or other resources that might facilitate her escape. The temperature dropped with alarming suddenness, her breath clouding before her face despite the warm summer evening. Not Elisabeth's gentle chill this time, but something sharper, more deliberate. "Curious little Matthews," a male voice observed from the shadows beside the fireplace. "Just like your mother." Sonya turned sharply, her heart racing despite her determination to maintain composure. A figure materialized from darkness, not gradually emerging, but simply there, as though a veil had been lifted between perception and reality. Sebastian von Vogel stood regarding her with sardonic amusement, his appearance matching photographs she'd seen in newspaper. The man whose three-whistle signal had preceded death. "You're not real," Sonya stated, intellect battling direct sensory evidence. Sebastian chuckled, the sound strangely hollow yet unmistakably present. "Reality proves more flexible than most suspect, Miss Matthews, particularly in houses like Whispering Pines that have witnessed sufficient history to develop opinions regarding its participants." He moved toward Sullivan's desk with fluid grace. Helena was equally skeptical during her first spectral encounter. Scientific minds resist evidence contradicting established understanding. His smile carried no warmth. "Until resistance becomes impossible." "What do you want?" Sonya asked, maintaining her position rather than retreating despite instinctive fear. This ghost, hallucination, whatever he represented, would not drive her from her purpose. She couldn't help but wonder if those executed passengers had shown the same courage before him. Want? Nothing material, certainly. Such desires diminish considerably after death. Sebastian gestured toward the leather ledger, concealing Sullivan's poem. "Though I retain an academic interest in recurring patterns, history repeating with such delicious fidelity, another Matthews woman captivated by another von Vogel man, Constance still pursuing justice decades delayed, Morrison still manipulating all parties toward his private objectives." The casual reference to her mother and Morrison sent a cold shock through Sonya's system. "You knew about Morrison and my mother?" "Of course." Sebastian's spectral form drifted toward the window, moonlight passing through his translucent substance. "I knew everything that occurred within my railway operations, Miss Matthews. Every shipment, every manifest discrepancy, every clandestine meeting between my secretary and the British intelligence officer assigned to monitor my activities." His smile turned knowing. They believed themselves so discreet, meeting in the signal box after hours, exchanging information alongside more intimate connections. As if such activities could escape notice within my domain, the casual revelation of her parents' relationship, confirmed by a ghost no less, momentarily disoriented Sonya's practical planning. "If you knew they were investigating your operations, why didn't you stop them?" she asked, thinking of her mother's journal entry, The documented horror of that night near Whitby, the whistle signals, the 3 precise gunshots. Why had Helena been spared when others were silenced permanently? Because James Morrison proved useful despite his divided loyalties, Sebastian replied with businessman's pragmatism transcending death itself. And Helena's commitment to documenting discrepancies provided perfect cover for intentional information leaks to various interested parties. His expression turned contemplative. Intelligence operations require multiple layers of deception, Miss Matthews. Sometimes even the operatives themselves must believe their discoveries represent genuine revelation rather than carefully crafted disclosure. Sonya fought to keep her expression neutral. And the others? The ones who weren't useful? Like Professor Edelstein and Mrs. Holloway? She watched his face carefully, wondering if a ghost could be surprised by the knowledge they didn't expect her to possess. Sebastian's eyebrow rose slightly. You've been reading Helena's more detailed observations, I see. His tone remained clinical, unnervingly detached. Regrettable necessities. The professor had discovered connections between certain shipments and German research facilities. Mrs. Holloway's refugee assistance program was inadvertently compromising several operative identities. The cold explanation of murder delivered so casually made Sonya's stomach turn. She thought of her mother's words, "I cannot sleep." The sound of the whistle, short, long, short, keeps echoing in my mind. I fear it shall be the signal that announces the death of my soul if I remain in this house much longer. And you wonder why my mother fled, Sonya said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Sebastian's ghost showed no reaction to her accusation. Helena made choices based on incomplete information, as most humans do. She witnessed necessary actions without understanding their full context. The implications expanded outward, her mother and Morrison investigating Sebastian while simultaneously being manipulated by him, information flowing through channels whose true purposes remained hidden from those who believed themselves in control. The pattern suggested disturbing parallels to present circumstances. And now Sullivan continues your legacy, Sonya observed, thinking of the broken window upstairs. Sullivan's volatile nature beneath his composed facade. How much of Sebastian's ruthlessness had he inherited? Sebastian's expression shifted, pride mingling with something darker. My nephew possesses considerable talent for the family business, though certain temperamental weaknesses occasionally manifest. The window, he gestured toward the cracked glass, suggests emotional regulation requires continued development. Why are you telling me this? Sonya demanded, increasingly unsettled by this casual conversation with a ghost who seemingly knew intimate details of her family history and showed no remorse for the deaths her mother had witnessed. Perhaps I simply enjoy conversation after decades of limited interaction, Sebastian replied, though his expression suggested a deeper purpose. Or perhaps I recognize your current dilemma resembles your mother's position 30 years ago. He drifted closer, the temperature dropping further with his proximity. You're planning an escape, just as she did, seeking Gregory's hidden evidence, just as she sought documentation regarding my operations. History repeating with remarkable precision. The parallel wasn't lost on Sonya. Her mother had written about her plans to escape after witnessing that execution, just as Sonya now sought her way out after discovering the darker truths of Whispering Pines. His spectral hand gestured toward the floor beneath their feet. Though you possess advantages Helena lacked, including knowledge of the private railway platform beneath this very room. Sonya's surprise must have shown despite her efforts at composure. Sebastian smiled, seemingly pleased by his revelation's impact. Sullivan hasn't mentioned our little family secret. How disappointing. The ghost moved with unnatural fluidity toward the fireplace. Whispering Pines was constructed with direct connection to the main Yorkshire line, a private platform allowing von Vogel family members to board trains without public observation. Quite useful during certain historical periods when discretion proved essential to operations. There's a railway platform under the mansion. Sonya couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice despite the apparent ghost materializing before her. Currently in disrepair, though Sullivan's restoration plans include eventual rehabilitation, Sebastian confirmed, appearing to enjoy her astonishment. The entrance lies behind the bookcase, a classic architectural subterfuge that lacks originality but maintains functional effectiveness. The tunnels connect directly to the main line, precisely where it curves behind the North Woods. The information represented a potential escape route, assuming the ghost spoke the truth rather than deliberate misinformation. Before Sonya could press for details, the study door swung fully open, though no visible hand touched it. The temperature shifted noticeably. Sebastian's sharp chill gave way to gentler coolness as another spectral presence entered. "Sharing family secrets again, my love." Elisabeth's voice carried affectionate exasperation despite its otherworldly distance. Unlike her husband's substantial manifestation, Elisabeth appeared more translucent, a luminous suggestion of human form rather than a detailed apparition. Sebastian's expression softened visibly at her appearance, ghostly features warming with genuine affection. "Merely offering historical context, my dear. Miss Matthews deserves an understanding of her mother's experiences in this house." "Always the strategist," Elisabeth replied, her tone gently teasing despite the mild reproof. She moved, or perhaps floated, towards Sonya with protective positioning, though her spectral gaze held unmistakable fondness when it turned towards Sebastian. Even in death, he cannot resist orchestrating circumstances. The interaction between ghosts, their apparent relationship continuing beyond death itself, struck Sonya as simultaneously unnerving and oddly touching. Though Elisabeth disagreed with Sebastian's approach, their banter carried the comfortable rhythm of a long-married couple whose affection transcended both mortal disagreements and death itself. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Elisabeth said, addressing Sonya directly. Her voice carried warmth despite its distant quality, intelligent, principled, determined to document truth regardless of consequences. Her ghostly form shifted toward Sebastian, reaching out with translucent fingers that briefly intertwined with his more substantial spectral hand. "Truth has many facets, as my husband and I often discussed in life." Sonya thought of her mother's journal entry, how Harold had confronted Sebastian after the execution, how Helena had heard their raised voices from Sebastian's study. Had Elisabeth been part of those conversations too? Had she tried to temper Sebastian's ruthlessness even then? Debated vigorously, Sebastian corrected with fond remembrance. Elisabeth possessed moral clarity I found both vexing and essential to my perspective. His spectral fingers squeezed hers with surprising tenderness. She provided balance I sorely needed, though rarely acknowledged adequately. The admission seemed to please Elisabeth, her luminous form brightening momentarily as she returned her attention to Sonya. The railway operations served multiple interests simultaneously, as they do now. Morrison inherited systems Sebastian established with considerable strategic foresight. She glanced at her husband with affectionate pride. Though perhaps occasionally lacking certain ethical considerations I attempted to supply, Sebastian accepted this gentle critique with surprising grace. My Elisabeth always saw beyond immediate business objectives to broader human implications. His tone carried respectful admiration alongside lingering affection. A capacity Sullivan appears to have inherited more from her influence than my example. Thankfully, this glimpse of genuine respect between ghostly spouses, Sebastian's recognition of Elisabeth's moral contributions, Elisabeth's appreciation of Sebastian's strategic brilliance, revealed complexity Sonya hadn't anticipated. Whatever their disagreements in life and death, genuine love bound them still. Sullivan struggles to reconcile competing inheritance, Elisabeth explained to Sonya. Business acumen from Sebastian's bloodline, ethical awareness from my guidance during his formative years. Her expression turned reflective. Though I only had him under my care for about 10 years after his mother passed. "That would be Rose, Sebastian's younger brother's wife?" Sonya asked, trying to sort out the family connections. Elisabeth nodded, her ghostly form rippling slightly with the movement. Sullivan's mother died when he was 11, just after the war ended. My poor nephew lost his father a few months later. Grief affects different souls in different ways. The Dresden explosion took Sebastian from us in '43, Elisabeth continued, her spectral hands still intertwined with her husband's ghost, but I lived. Until 1956. Those years were difficult with Sebastian gone, though I remained at Whispering Pines to maintain what remained of the von Vogel legacy. Elisabeth became Sullivan's guardian after his parents' deaths, Sebastian added, his tone softening with genuine appreciation, providing stability when his world collapsed, much as she had always done for me. When Rose died in 1950, Sullivan came to live with me here, Elisabeth explained. A bright, troubled boy who'd already experienced too much loss. I tried to balance Sebastian's business legacy with more humane principles during those formative years. Sonya tried to reconcile this timeline, Sebastian dying in 1943, Elisabeth surviving until 1956, and raising young Sullivan for approximately 6 years before her death. The ghosts before her represented people separated by years in life, reunited somehow in their spectral manifestations. You shaped him more than you know, my dear, Sebastian acknowledged. Whatever moral compass Sullivan possesses originated in your influence during those critical years. The poem suggests deeper capacity than I had anticipated, Sebastian admitted, his ghostly attention turning toward the leather ledger on Sullivan's desk. Perhaps I underestimated certain aspects of his development, as you often underestimated matters of the heart, Elisabeth noted with gentle affection. Not your natural domain, beloved. Sebastian inclined his head, acknowledging this limitation with unusual humility. Railway operations proved considerably more comprehensible than emotional complexities. He turned to Sonya with renewed focus. Which brings us to your current circumstances, Miss Matthews. You're contemplating escape while Sullivan conducts tonight's shipment. Sonya thought of her mother's journal entry about the North Sea shipments, the unmarked vessels, the crates with only numbers, the mysteriously zigzagging routes across the water. Was Sullivan continuing these operations too? We cannot tell you what path to choose, Elisabeth added, moving closer to Sonya while maintaining a spectral connection with her husband. But perhaps our experience offers a perspective worth considering. History need not repeat precisely if one recognizes patterns in time to adjust course, Sebastian observed, his tone surprisingly devoid of manipulation. Helena's choices created consequences that continue reverberating through present circumstances. My husband speaks the truth, Elisabeth confirmed, though perhaps with an insufficient appreciation for the pressures your mother faced. Her luminous form drifted toward the window, moonlight passing through her translucent substance. Helena fled England with valid reasons, yet her departure created unintended outcomes that shaped multiple lives, including yours, Sullivan's, and Morrison's. Sonya thought of her mother's final words in that journal entry. I fear it shall be the signal that announces the death of my soul if I remain in this house much longer. If I ever escape this place, I shall never look upon the sea again. The premonition of her escape, the desperate need to flee from what she had witnessed. Though I witnessed Helena's time here only from beyond, Sebastian added, nodding toward his wife, while Elisabeth interacted with her during those critical months before the explosion. Sebastian's ghost began fading gradually, his form becoming increasingly transparent. Consider all variables before acting, Miss Matthews. Strategic patience often yields superior results to immediate reaction. His voice remained, though his appearance diminished. Elisabeth, my dear, I shall leave further counsel to your gentler approach. Always delegating the human elements, Elisabeth replied with fond exasperation, though her spectral hand reached toward his fading form with evident affection. Rest well, beloved. With a final nod toward Sonya, Sebastian dissolved completely, there one moment, absent the next. The study's temperature gradually returned to normal, though Elisabeth's gentler presence remained, her luminous form now more clearly visible without Sebastian's dominant manifestation. "You must forgive my husband's rather direct approach," she said, her tone suggesting affectionate acceptance of traits she'd long ago ceased attempting to change. "Death has not altered his fundamental nature, nor his tendency toward manipulation, though I find I love him no less for these consistent qualities." Despite the surreal nature of this ghostly interaction, Sonya found herself responding to Elisabeth's gentle presence and the glimpse of genuine partnership she'd witnessed between the spectral couple. "You and Sebastian seem to have maintained your relationship beyond death." Elisabeth's form brightened slightly, her translucent appearance momentarily more substantial. "Love transcends mortality, though. Disagreements do as well." Ghostly laughter accompanied this observation, a delicate sound like distant wind chimes. "Sebastian and I represent different approaches to life's challenges, yet our connection remains our greatest strength both in life and whatever state we currently occupy." "You raised Sullivan after his mother died," Sonya noted, seeking to understand these historical connections. "Those 6 years were both challenging and rewarding," Elisabeth confirmed. "Rose's death devastated him. Losing his father was even more so." Sullivan retreated into books and railway models, finding solace in orderly systems when his emotional world collapsed. Her ghostly features softened with remembered tenderness. "I tried to provide structure without rigidity, opportunity without overwhelming expectation. Sullivan was only 17 when I passed in 56, still finding his path forward." Elisabeth's luminous form drifted toward Sullivan's desk, her translucent hand passing through the leather ledger concealing his poem. "After my death, Sullivan had only Morrison for guidance, a connection that began when Morrison approached him about rebuilding the von Vogel railway operations." "Morrison knew both you and Sebastian?" Sonya asked. "Morrison was initially assigned to monitor Sebastian's wartime activities," Elisabeth explained. "After the explosion, he maintained connections to various von Vogel interests while building his enterprises. When Sullivan needed direction after my passing, Morrison appeared with perfect timing and considerable influence. She drifted closer, her presence bringing comfort rather than unease. Sullivan believes himself entirely his uncle's heir, continuing railway operations, maintaining business priorities, subjugating personal feelings to professional objectives. Yet he differs in crucial aspects. Sebastian himself has begun to recognize, though he would rarely admit such recognition directly." "What aspects?" Sonya asked, finding herself engaged in this impossible conversation despite rational objections to its very occurrence. "Capacity for connection beyond strategic advantage, recognition of moral boundaries beyond pragmatic necessity, potential for growth beyond inherited patterns." Elisabeth's form seemed to strengthen as she spoke, becoming momentarily more substantial before fading back to translucent luminosity. "The poem you discovered represents truth Sullivan rarely acknowledges even to himself." Sonya considered these ghostly insights alongside her observations of Sullivan's contradictory nature, the calculated businessman conducting weapons, shipments alongside the man who wrote of being shaped by shadows and strife, yet yearning for her unguarded gaze. "Sebastian mentioned a railway platform beneath the mansion," she said, practical concerns reasserting themselves despite supernatural circumstances. "Is that real or another of his strategic revelations?" "The platform exists," Elisabeth confirmed, though currently unusable due to tunnel collapse near the main line connection. Sullivan's restoration plans include eventually rehabilitating that access point, but construction hasn't yet reached those sections. The confirmation simultaneously validated and negated a potential escape route. The platform existed but offered no immediate exit strategy. Sonya processed this information alongside her developing understanding of Sullivan's complex nature. "You're planning to leave while Sullivan conducts tonight's railway operations," Elisabeth observed, her ghostly perception extending beyond physical appearance. "Seeking Gregory's hidden documents?" Sonya neither confirmed nor denied, though her silence likely provided an answer enough to this perceptive spirit. Elisabeth's luminous form drifted toward the window, moonlight passing through her translucent substance. "I cannot tell you what path to choose," the ghost said finally, "but I would counsel patience alongside determination, understanding before action." Helena's flight from England proved necessary given her circumstances, but created consequences that echo through decades. "I'm not my mother," Sonya replied, echoing her statement to Gregory. "No," Elisabeth agreed, her spectral appearance beginning to fade. "You possess her strength with a different foundation. Your choices need not mirror hers, though similar forces attempt to shape your decisions." As the ghost gradually disappeared, her final words hung in the study's stillness. "Sebastian and I are merely impressions time has pressed into this house's memory, reflections of people long departed, rather than their actual spirits. Our counsel carries the limitations of our mortal understanding, frozen at the moment of our passing. Judge accordingly and trust your wisdom above our echoed experience." With that disquieting self-assessment, Elisabeth vanished completely, leaving Sonya alone in Sullivan's study with impossible revelations and an uncertain path forward. The documents Gregory had hidden still represented her best leverage against Morrison's operations, yet Elisabeth's counsel suggested hasty action might create consequences as far-reaching as Helena's flight from England 25 years earlier. Outside Whispering Pines, darkness had fully claimed the Yorkshire countryside. Somewhere along restored railway lines, Sullivan oversaw another weapons shipment bound for Soviet Russia. In Leeds General Infirmary, Gregory Constant recovered from accidental injuries, while police guarded his room against unnamed threats. Throughout Britain, Morrison's network maintained surveillance while its architect balanced commercial empire against newly complicated personal interest in the daughter he had never acknowledged. Sonya Matthews stood in Sullivan von Vogel's study, surrounded by literal and figurative ghosts, contemplating choices whose consequences might echo through decades, just as her mother's decisions continued shaping present circumstances. Elisabeth had counseled patience alongside determination and understanding before action. Sebastian warned that history needs not to be repeated precisely if one recognizes patterns in time to adjust course. Between these spectral advisors and her instincts, Sonya found herself reconsidering immediate escape plans. The documents remained an essential objective, but perhaps confrontation offered a better strategy than clandestine flight. Sullivan's poem suggested emotional vulnerability that might provide leverage alongside the evidence Gregory had hidden. Unlike Helena, who had fled England carrying an unborn child and dangerous knowledge, Sonya would remain at Whispering Pines awaiting Sullivan's return. Not as a passive prisoner, but as a strategic player, gathering information, assessing options, and preparing for decisive action when optimal circumstances aligned. The ghosts had offered their counsel. Now, she would determine which aspects merited incorporation into her developing strategy. The night had gone perfectly, operationally speaking. The weapons transfer at Harrogate Junction had proceeded with textbook efficiency, documentation completed with characteristic precision, and cargo secured for the Hamburg connection precisely on schedule. Morrison would be pleased with Sullivan's performance, another successful shipment reinforcing his value to the organization. Yet, as Sullivan guided the Jaguar up Whispering Pines' winding drive, operational success felt strangely hollow. The eastern sky had begun lightening, false dawn painting the horizon in muted lavenders and greys that would eventually yield to morning proper. He had been gone nearly 8 hours, sufficient time for Sonya to have implemented whatever escape plans she might have formulated during his absence. That possibility created unexpected discomfort. The rational part of his mind, the part shaped by Sebastian's legacy and Morrison's mentorship, recognized strategic advantages to Sonya remaining at Whispering Pines, where he could monitor her movements, anticipate her actions, and potentially extract information about Gregory's hidden documents. Yet some deeper part rebelled against this calculation, preferring her continued presence for reasons entirely divorced from strategic consideration. The poem she had discovered made that preference embarrassingly explicit. Sullivan parked before the mansion's entrance, physical exhaustion settling into his bones as the night's sustained vigilance exacted its toll. Morrison would be expecting his call, operational confirmation and status update regarding Sonya Matthews. Gregory Constant would require permanent silencing given his contact with Hoffman and whatever documentation he had hidden in his crashed Austin. These necessities had seemed straightforward mere days ago. Logical steps toward restoring the von Vogel railway empire, toward eventually supplanting Morrison within his organization. Now they carried uncomfortable weight, clouded by unfamiliar emotional considerations that Elisabeth would likely have approved. But Sullivan himself struggled to reconcile with operational requirements. Inside, Whispering Pines greeted him with familiar silence. He moved through darkened corridors with practiced ease, instinctively checking rooms as he passed. Library empty, music room undisturbed, kitchen showing evidence of recent use but currently unoccupied. A teacup in the sink, still faintly warm, suggested Sonya remained within the mansion rather than attempting escape during his absence. The possibility both relieved and unsettled him. What had convinced her to stay? Elisabeth's spectral intervention, perhaps, or some strategic calculation of her own? Sullivan climbed the stairs toward his bedroom, anticipating empty sheets but needing to confirm before reporting to Morrison. The room proved precisely as he expected. Bed untouched since morning, bathroom undisturbed. Sonya's borrowed clothing returned to the chair where she had originally discovered it. Methodically, he continued his search, the mansion gradually yielding to dawn's strengthening light. Each empty room increased both concern and curiosity, until a flash of movement through the conservatory windows caught his attention. Someone moved in the gardens beyond, a feminine silhouette among the roses Elisabeth had planted decades earlier, and Sullivan still dutifully maintained. Sullivan stood watching for several moments, uncertainty uncharacteristically delaying action. Personal instinct urged an immediate approach. Professional calculations suggested observation from a distance. The conflict between these impulses represented precisely the internal division his poem had unwisely committed to paper. A poem currently held in Sonya's hands as she sat among the roses, its pages visible even from this distance. Decision made for him, Sullivan moved through the conservatory's glass doors into the gardens beyond. The air carried morning's crisp potential, dew-dampening formal pathways as he approached the stone bench where Sonya waited. She wore yesterday's clothes, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, her expression composed yet revealing signs of a sleepless night that likely mirrored his own. "You stayed," he observed, stopping several paces away. Close enough for conversation, distant enough to respect boundaries neither had explicitly established. "I considered alternatives," Sonya replied, her gaze direct despite whatever vulnerability the poem's discovery might have created. Elisabeth provided surprisingly persuasive counsel against hasty departure. The casual reference to his aunt's ghost might have been shocking under different circumstances. Tonight, after weapons transfers, buried documents, and Morrison's ominous instructions, supernatural manifestations seemed merely another complication among many. "She's always favored patience over impulsivity," Sullivan noted, remembering Elisabeth's gentle guidance during his most turbulent teenage years, though I confess surprise at her successful persuasion. "Your uncle's documents would seem a compelling reason for immediate action. Perhaps I recognize that escape without a clear strategy merely exchanges one form of vulnerability for..." Sonya held up the pages containing his poem. "Or perhaps I found reason to reconsider certain assumptions about Whispering Pines' current master." The moment stretched between them, electric with unspoken implications. Sullivan remained standing while Sonya occupied the stone bench, physical positioning reflecting the strange power dynamic between them. Captor and captive, host and guest, two individuals drawn together by circumstances neither had anticipated nor particularly welcomed. "You weren't meant to find that," Sullivan said finally, nodding toward the poem in her hands. Clearly, her expression remained unreadable. "Yet I did. As I found Sebastian and Elisabeth's ghosts, the hidden railway platform, various uncomfortable truths about Morrison and my mother. Whispering Pines reveals its secrets according to its timetable, Sullivan observed, usually with inconvenient timing. Did you mean what you wrote here? Sonya asked directly, cutting through oblique conversation to the question's heart. Or is this another strategic document, crafted for calculated effect rather than genuine expression? The challenge stripped away comfortable ambiguity. Sullivan considered deflection, measured half-truth, considered a calculated response that might advance whatever game they played. Yet standing in dawn's first proper light, surrounded by roses Elisabeth had planted and he had maintained, the truth emerged before strategy could intercept it. I meant it, he acknowledged, voice low but steady, though I would never have shared it voluntarily. Because vulnerability represents tactical disadvantage, because emotional entanglement undermines operational clarity, Sullivan corrected, the words sounding hollow even to his ears. And because whatever exists between us carries complications neither can afford given current circumstances, Sonya studied him with unsettling directness. Tell me about the weapons transfer tonight. The shipment to Soviet Russia that Gregory warned was part of Morrison's ongoing operations. The abrupt subject change momentarily disoriented him, personal vulnerability giving way to operational specifics with jarring speed. Sullivan maintained neutral expression through practiced discipline, though his thoughts raced through potential responses and their likely consequences. Military technology components officially restricted under NATO agreements, he answered finally, choosing precise truth rather than comfortable evasion. Disguised as agricultural equipment, transferred tonight from the von Vogel siding to specialized container cars bound for Hamburg, eventually reaching Russian buyers through established channels. Sonya's expression revealed nothing beyond calm assessment. And you supervised this illegal weapons smuggling mere hours after writing poetry about finding your sanctuary in my presence. Put that way, the contradiction seemed starkly indefensible. Sullivan found himself seeking justification despite professional instincts warning against such vulnerability. The railway restoration represents my family legacy, he explained, hearing the inadequacy even as he spoke. Morrison controls resources essential to that restoration. Certain compromises proved necessary to advance primary objectives. Compromises including international weapons smuggling and conspiracy to eliminate inconvenient investigators, like my uncle. The question carried no accusation, merely a calm inquiry that somehow proved more devastating than outright condemnation. Sullivan met her gaze directly. Your uncle possesses documentation that threatens Morrison's entire operation. The organization cannot permit such vulnerability to persist indefinitely. The organization, Sonya repeated. Or you personally. The distinction has grown increasingly significant, Sullivan admitted, the confession emerging without calculated consideration. Initially, my objectives and Morrison's appeared functionally aligned. Recent developments have revealed potentially irreconcilable differences. Dawn had fully claimed the sky now, golden light spilling across formal gardens Elisabeth had designed and Sullivan had maintained through decades of solitary residence. In this strengthening illumination, Sonya Matthews studied him with a penetrating assessment that seemed to reach past practiced defenses to the conflicted truth beneath. Your poem speaks of being shaped by shadows and strife, yet finding solace rare in my presence, she said finally. Do those emotions truly matter to you, Sullivan? Or are they merely inconvenient biological responses to be managed alongside operational considerations? The question's directness left no room for strategic evasion. Sullivan found himself considering his response with unusual care, weighing truth against self-protection with conscious deliberation, rarely applied to emotional matters. They matter, he acknowledged finally. More than is tactically advisable given current circumstances, more than professional discipline should permit, more than I've allowed myself to recognize until finding that poem in your possession. Somewhere inside Whispering Pines, a telephone began ringing. the private line in his study that only Morrison and certain key associates possessed. The sound carried clearly through morning stillness, its implications hanging between them like a physical presence. Morrison calling for operational confirmation and a status update regarding Sonya Matthews. "You should answer that," Sonya observed, no judgment in her tone despite the obvious understanding of the caller's likely identity. "Your employer expects prompt reports regarding successful shipments." Sullivan made no move toward the house, the ringing telephone representing choices he had made and continued making despite growing internal conflict. "Morrison is not precisely my employer, partner, mentor, father figure replacing those you lost." Sonya's assessment carried uncomfortable insight. Whatever terminology applies, he expects your loyalty and operational efficiency. As demonstrated by tonight's weapons transfer, the telephone continued ringing, Morrison's characteristic persistence evident in its relentless summons. Sullivan remained in the garden, aware of professional obligation, yet somehow unable to prioritize it above the conversation currently unfolding. "I've maintained strategic alliance with Morrison while pursuing independent objectives," he explained, aware of how self-serving such characterization might appear. "The railway restoration represents means rather than end, re-establishing infrastructure necessary for longer-term goals beyond current operations." "Goals including eventually supplanting Morrison within his organization?" Sonya suggested, her perception uncomfortably accurate. "Sebastian mentioned your ambitions extend beyond merely serving Morrison's interests." The casual reference to a ghostly conversation with his uncle might have been shocking under different circumstances. This morning, it merely confirmed what Sullivan had already suspected. Whispering Pines had revealed its spectral inhabitants during his absence, complicated by already complex dynamics. Sebastian would recognize such ambition, Sullivan acknowledged, though his assessment likely emphasized strategic calculation above other considerations. He hesitated, then added with unusual candor, "Meeting. You has introduced variables. Neither Sebastian's guidance nor Morrison's mentorship prepared me to address adequately." The telephone finally stopped ringing, silence somehow more ominous than its persistent summons had been. Morrison would interpret a lack of response as a potentially significant development, which might accelerate contingency plans regarding both Sonya's containment and Gregory's elimination. Sonya seemed to reach a similar conclusion, her expression revealing a calculated assessment alongside whatever emotional response his confession might have generated. "Morrison will assume something has gone wrong," she observed, "that I've escaped or compromised your loyalty or otherwise interfered with operational expectations." "Yes," Sullivan confirmed, the single syllable acknowledging broader implications they both recognized, which creates a compressed timeline for decisions neither of us is adequately prepared to make, such as whether you intend to facilitate Morrison's plans regarding my uncle, Sonya stated rather than asking, or whether I should trust the man who writes about finding sanctuary in my presence while simultaneously supervising illegal weapons shipments. The challenge cut to their situation's heart, the fundamental conflict between Sullivan's operational responsibilities and his growing emotional connection to this woman whose family history intertwined with his own in ways neither had fully unraveled. "Trust represents tactical vulnerability," Sullivan said quietly, repeating Morrison's oft-stated principle while recognizing its inadequacy in present circumstances. Yet operational success increasingly requires precisely such vulnerability between us. "Operational success," Sonya repeated, a hint of a sad smile touching her lips. "Even your emotional confessions frame themselves in business terminology. Strategic alliance rather than friendship. Operational success rather than genuine connection." The observation struck with unexpected force, revealing patterns of thought and expression Sullivan had never consciously examined. Elisabeth had noted similar tendencies during his formative years, his retreat into systems and structures when emotional complexity threatened overwhelming control. "I lack adequate vocabulary for certain experiences," He admitted the confession representing vulnerability he would have considered tactically unacceptable mere days earlier. Railway operations, business negotiations, strategic planning, these domains provide comfortable linguistic framework. Other territories remain less thoroughly mapped. Sonya's expression softened slightly, though her assessment remained penetrating. The poem suggests otherwise. In her presence, the darkness recedes, a flicker of hope amidst my misdeeds. Those words didn't come from business terminology or strategic calculation. Sullivan inclined his head, acknowledging the point without verbal confirmation. The poem represented momentary lapse in disciplined compartmentalization, emotional truth escaping professional constraint during an unguarded moment. That Sonya had discovered this vulnerability created both tactical disadvantage and unexpected relief. Your continued presence at Whispering Pines suggests some reciprocal interest beyond mere strategic positioning, he observed. Elisabeth's counsel notwithstanding, perhaps, Sonya acknowledged, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. Or perhaps I recognize that genuine connection might serve both our interests better than continued manipulation. Morrison represents a threat to both of us, albeit for different reasons. The telephone in his study began ringing again. Morrison's second attempt carried increased urgency after the initial failure to connect. Sullivan glanced toward the house, professional obligation warring with personal inclination in ways he found increasingly difficult to reconcile. "You should answer," Sonya said again, rising from the stone bench with Sullivan's poem still held in her hand. "Morrison requires reassurance regarding tonight's shipment and my continued containment at Whispering Pines." Sullivan studied her with renewed assessment, recognizing strategic calculation alongside something more complex in her measured response. "And what will you be doing while I provide such reassurance?" Considering our respective positions and potential paths forward, she replied with careful neutrality that mirrored his professional demeanor. Gregory's hidden documents remain essential leverage against Morrison's operations. "Your poem," she glanced at the pages in her hand, "suggests potential alliance beyond mere strategic positioning." "Potential alliance," Sullivan repeated, a hint of a wry smile acknowledging her adoption of his terminology. "Though trust between us remains understandably limited, given the circumstances. Trust requires a foundation in shared truth," Sonya observed. "Something neither of us has prioritized in our interactions thus far." The observation carried uncomfortable accuracy. Sullivan inclined his head in acknowledgement, professional assessment noting tactical vulnerability, while something deeper recognized necessary evolution in their complex relationship. "I'll have to eliminate your uncle if Morrison instructs me to do so," he said finally, choosing brutal honesty over comfortable evasion. "Unless alternative strategy presents itself within an extremely compressed timeline." Sonya's expression revealed nothing beyond calm assessment, though subtle tension appeared in her shoulders and hands. "At least that represents genuine truth rather than calculated reassurance," she replied. "A foundation, however uncomfortable, upon which actual trust might eventually be constructed." The telephone's persistent ringing underscored the limited time for such construction. Sullivan gestured toward the house with a reluctant acceptance of professional obligation. "I need to answer that call." "I know," Sonya acknowledged, her expression suggesting similar acceptance of uncomfortable necessity. "Tell Morrison whatever you must to maintain operational positioning. I'll be here when you've finished." Continuing our conversation about potential alliance and necessary compromises, the implicit promise of continued presence, of not attempting escape during his conversation with Morrison, carried weight beyond its simple words. Sullivan found himself believing her despite professional training that emphasized skepticism regarding such assurances. "Thank you," he said simply, the words encompassing multiple layers of meaning, neither fully articulated. As Sullivan turned toward the house and Morrison's persistent summons, something shifted between them. Not trust precisely, not yet, but perhaps the foundation upon which such trust might eventually be constructed. The weapons shipment remained an operational reality. Gregory's hidden documents continued representing essential leverage. Morrison's threat persisted undiminished. Yet somehow, in the dawn's strengthening light among roses, Elisabeth had planted decades earlier, Sonya Matthews and Sullivan von Vogel had established a tenuous connection that transcended mere strategic positioning. The poem she still held in her hand had revealed a vulnerability he would never have willingly exposed. Her continued presence at Whispering Pines suggested reciprocal interest beyond tactical calculation. The telephone kept ringing as Sullivan crossed the threshold into his ancestral home, Morrison's persistence demanding immediate attention. Yet, Sullivan's thoughts remained in the garden with the woman whose unexpected arrival had introduced variables neither Sebastian's legacy nor Morrison's mentorship had prepared him to address effectively. Whatever consequences awaited, whatever compromises proved necessary, whatever alliance might emerge from their fractured beginning, Sullivan von Vogel found himself making choices based on considerations beyond mere operational efficiency for the first time in his carefully controlled existence. Sullivan closed the study door behind him, creating an artificial barrier between garden conversation and imminent business debriefing. The telephone's insistent ringing, Morrison's third attempt to reach him, conveyed urgency beyond normal operational protocol. His failure to report immediately following the shipment had triggered concern or suspicion. He took a steadying breath, his shoulders straightening as he transitioned from the vulnerability of garden confessions to the practiced efficiency of railway operations. The compartmentalization that had served him since childhood asserted itself, though with increasing difficulty as boundaries between personal inclination and professional obligation continued blurring. "Von Vogel," he answered, voice calibrated to project calm control despite the night's accumulated exhaustion. 6 minutes, 18 seconds, Morrison's voice replied without preamble. The duration between the first call attempt and your response. A concerning delay given operational parameters. Sullivan recognized the implied questioning beneath Morrison's precise observation. The weapons transfer proceeded exactly as planned. Documentation was completed, cargo secured, and the Hamburg connection confirmed. No unexpected variables affected operational execution, yet you failed to report immediately upon completion, Morrison noted, his tone revealing nothing beyond mild curiosity despite the implicit accusation. "I conducted an additional security assessment of the Harrogate Junction signal box," Sullivan improvised smoothly. Given Gregory Constant's recent photography of the location, prudence suggested thorough examination for surveillance devices or evidence tampering. The explanation represented plausible operational concern while avoiding direct mention of his conversation with Sonya. Morrison's momentary silence suggested an analysis of this justification, an assessment of its probability against alternative explanations. "Your thoroughness is commendable," Morrison said finally, apparent acceptance belied by a subtle undertone Sullivan recognized from long association. Though perhaps unnecessary given recent developments, Sullivan maintained professional neutrality despite internal alertness triggered by this statement. "What developments?" "The documentation Gregory Constant collected from our mutual friend in London," Morrison replied, satisfaction evident despite his measured tone. "It has been retrieved from his vehicle and secured in appropriate storage." The revelation landed with a seismic impact. Sullivan struggled to conceal. The documents Gregory had hidden represented critical leverage, evidence potentially damaging to Morrison's entire operation, information that might have provided Sonya answers about her mother's flight from England decades earlier. That Morrison had recovered this material fundamentally altered strategic calculations regarding both operational security and personal positioning. "That represents significant operational advantage," Sullivan observed, mind racing through implications and adjusted possibilities. "How was retrieval accomplished?" Through established channels within local law enforcement, Morrison replied, deliberately vague yet somehow conveying both the extent of his influence and the methodical thoroughness of its application. The documents were precisely where anticipated, beneath driver's seat upholstery. Quite cleverly concealed, though ultimately insufficient against determined recovery efforts. The information confirmed what Sullivan had suspected. Morrison maintained surveillance of Gregory's hospital room and had likely overheard his instructions to Sonya regarding the document's location. This realization carried uncomfortable implications regarding the extent of Morrison's information network and the limitations of privacy even within supposedly secure locations. A fortunate development, Sullivan replied, professional mask maintaining despite internal recalculation. The evidence he had personally compiled against Morrison remained substantial but incomplete. Insufficient leverage to supplant the older man within his organization without the additional documentation Gregory had collected from Hoffman. Indeed, Morrison agreed, though certain questions remain regarding Gregory Constant's continued viability as an operational variable. His knowledge represents persistent vulnerability despite documentation recovery. The implied instruction carried chilling clarity beneath professional terminology. Gregory Constant's elimination remained an operational priority despite the document's retrieval. Sullivan opened his mouth to acknowledge this directive when unexpected movement caught his peripheral vision. Sonya Matthews stood in the study doorway, her expression revealing she had overheard at least portions of their conversation. How long she had been there? What specifically had she heard? These variables remained unknown, creating dangerous uncertainty regarding her understanding and potential actions. Before Sullivan could signal her to remain silent or otherwise manage this unexpected complication, Sonya crossed the room with a determined purpose. Her hand extended toward the telephone with unmistakable intent. "Sullivan?" Morrison's voice inquired, the unusual silence having triggered his attention. "Is there a development requiring clarification?" Instead of answering, Sullivan found the receiver gently but firmly removed from his grasp, Sonya's fingers brushing his as she took control of the conversation with surprising boldness. Her expression conveyed neither apology nor request for permission, merely calm determination as she raised the telephone to her ear. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice steady despite the audacity of her action. "This is Sonya Matthews. I believe it's time we spoke directly, rather than continuing to maneuver around each other through intermediaries." Sullivan remained frozen, caught between professional horror at this operational breach and a reluctant admiration for her composure. Morrison's momentary silence suggested a similar surprise, though his recovery proved predictably swift. "Miss Matthews." Morrison's voice carried enough for Sullivan to hear, despite his no longer holding the receiver. "What an unexpected pleasure. I've been looking forward to making your acquaintance under appropriate circumstances." "These circumstances seem as appropriate as any," Sonya replied, maintaining remarkable composure for someone directly confronting the architect of international weapons smuggling operations. "Considering you've been monitoring my movements since I arrived in Yorkshire and recently acquired documents concerning my mother's history with your organization." Sullivan watched with growing concern and reluctant respect as Sonya positioned herself behind his desk, effectively claiming the power position within the study. Her free hand rested on the leather ledger concealing his poem, a conscious gesture or unconscious coincidence, he couldn't determine. "Your directness is refreshing," Morrison's voice acknowledged, carrying unexpected warmth Sullivan recognized as genuine despite professional skepticism, a quality your mother possessed in abundance, though perhaps applied with less strategic consideration than you currently demonstrate. "I understand you knew my mother quite well," Sonya continued, her gaze briefly meeting Sullivan's before returning to a middle distance. "Perhaps better than professional association typically warrants." The implication hung between them. Sonya's awareness of Morrison's likely paternity, creating leverage she applied with surprising precision for someone so recently introduced to these complicated dynamics. Sullivan remained motionless, unwilling to interrupt what had become a fascinating study in power negotiation between two individuals he had previously considered unequal participants. Helena Matthews was a remarkable woman, Morrison replied, after a brief pause suggesting recalibration. Her contributions to certain historical events proved more significant than public records acknowledge, and her relationship with you produced consequences extending beyond historical documentation, Sonya observed. Directness inherited from both potential parents. Consequences including a daughter who finds herself currently entangled in your ongoing operations. Sullivan watched Morrison's strategic recalculation manifest through the telephone. A subtle change in breathing pattern, suggesting adjustment to unexpected directness from someone he had underestimated despite genetic connection. Your presence in Yorkshire has introduced variables requiring careful consideration, Morrison acknowledged finally. Perhaps direct conversation would prove mutually beneficial at this juncture. I could visit Whispering Pines this afternoon to discuss matters of shared interest. Sonya's gaze found Sullivan's again, silent communication passing between them regarding the implications of Morrison's suggested meeting. For all their complicated history and limited trust, Sullivan recognized they now represented a potential alliance against Morrison's manipulations, a partnership forged through necessity rather than complete confidence. That would be acceptable, Sonya agreed carefully, though I have certain questions requiring immediate clarification rather than delayed discussion. I'm at your disposal, Morrison replied, unexpected acquiescence suggesting genuine interest beyond mere operational management. Is my uncle dead? The question emerged with brutal directness, Sonya's composure momentarily revealing cracks through which genuine concern showed despite strategic positioning. The silence that followed carried unbearable weight. Sullivan found himself holding his breath despite professional detachment, uncertain whether Morrison had already implemented a permanent solution to Gregory Constant's inconvenient knowledge. Gregory Constant's current status represents a complex operational variable, Morrison answered finally, professional terminology providing neither confirmation nor denial. His hospital room remains under observation, though certain unexpected developments have potentially altered previously established parameters. The deliberately oblique response revealed nothing concrete, yet somehow conveyed essential information. Gregory was neither confirmed dead nor definitively alive, his status representing an ongoing situation rather than a resolved conclusion. Sullivan recognized the calculated ambiguity designed to maintain leverage while revealing nothing actionable. I see, Sonya replied, her expression suggesting she understood precisely what Morrison had and hadn't revealed. We'll discuss the matter further this afternoon, along with certain other topics of mutual interest. I look forward to our conversation, Morrison agreed, unexpected warmth again coloring his typically measured tone. And to make your acquaintance properly after these weeks of indirect interaction. As do I, Sonya replied with matching formality belied by tension evident in her posture. 3 o'clock would be convenient. 3 o'clock it is, Morrison confirmed. Sullivan can make appropriate arrangements for our meeting. Until then, Miss Matthews. Sonya replaced the receiver with careful precision, the conversation's conclusion, leaving the study filled with unresolved implications and strategic recalculations. Sullivan remained where he stood, reassessing this woman who had just directly confronted the most dangerous man in his professional universe with surprising composure and evident strategic thinking. That was either remarkably brave or catastrophically reckless, he observed once the connection had been severed. I haven't decided which. Neither have I, Sonya admitted, unexpected candor suggesting shared recognition of their precarious position. Though continuing to serve as passive chess pieces seemed increasingly unproductive given recent developments. Morrison has recovered Gregory's documents, Sullivan stated, confirmation unnecessary, given she had overheard that portion of their conversation. So, it seems, her expression revealed calculation beneath surface composure. which fundamentally alters our respective bargaining positions while creating compressed timeline for strategic decisions. Neither may be prepared to make. The echo of his garden phrasing carried an ironic acknowledgement of their shared predicament. Sullivan found himself smiling, despite professional concerns regarding operational security and compromised positioning. Morrison seemed intrigued rather than angered by your intervention, he noted, analyzing the interaction with professional detachment despite personal involvement. His tone carried genuine interest beyond operational management. Paternal curiosity, perhaps, Sonya suggested with a complicated expression, suggesting both recognition of biological reality and uncertainty regarding its implications. Though filtered through decades of strategic calculation rather than conventional emotional connection, Sullivan considered this assessment, finding it aligned with his understanding of Morrison's complex nature. His arrival this afternoon creates both opportunity and significant risk. Whatever alliance we might establish faces immediate testing against superior resources and established influence networks. Alliance, Sonya repeated, studying him with renewed assessment. Is that what exists between us now? After midnight weapons shipments and ghostly interventions and garden confessions at dawn, the question carried multiple layers beneath its surface simplicity. Sullivan considered his response with uncharacteristic care, weighing truth against self-protection with conscious deliberation rarely applied to personal matters. An alliance of necessity, perhaps, he acknowledged, founded on insufficient trust, yet mutual recognition of Morrison's threat to our respective interests. After a brief hesitation, he added, though potentially influenced by considerations beyond mere strategic positioning, as certain poetry might suggest. The oblique reference to his poem brought unexpected color to Sonya's cheeks, despite her controlled expression. Morrison knew exactly where to find Gregory's hidden documents, she observed, redirecting the conversation toward operational concerns rather than emotional complications, which suggests surveillance capabilities exceeding what you had anticipated. Indeed, Sullivan agreed, accepting the conversational shift with a professional appreciation for her strategic focus, despite considerable emotional undertow. Morrison's information network extends through official channels we might otherwise consider secure harbors, including hospital rooms and police stations, Sonya noted, understanding evident in her expression. Yet he indicated unexpected developments regarding your uncle's status, Sullivan reminded her, analytical mind still processing Morrison's careful phrasing, suggesting Gregory might have implemented contingency plans we haven't yet identified, or that Morrison eliminated him but prefers keeping that information as future leverage, Sonya countered, strategic thinking matching Sullivan's own despite her limited experience with such operations. Ambiguity serves his purposes better than confirmed outcomes. The assessment demonstrated remarkable insight into Morrison's methodologies, further evidence of inherited intelligence Sullivan found simultaneously admirable and concerning. Sonya Matthews represented a potential ally whose capabilities might complement his own. Yet those same capabilities created unpredictable variables within carefully constructed plans. Whatever Gregory's current status, Morrison's visit this afternoon represents critical inflection point, Sullivan observed, practical concerns reasserting themselves. His recovery of the documents fundamentally alters strategic calculations regarding both his containment and potential replacement. Replacement? Sonya's eyebrow rose slightly, assessment sharpening. Your ambitions extend beyond mere partnership within Morrison's organization, it seems. Sullivan met her gaze directly, choosing transparency where strategic calculation might have suggested continued opacity. The von Vogel railway legacy transcends Morrison's current applications. Restoration represents the first phase toward broader objectives, requiring operational control rather than subordinate positioning. Objectives potentially including the elimination of weapons smuggling operations. Morrison currently conducts along those same lines. Sonya suggested the question carrying both hope and skepticism. Strategic redirection toward more sustainable commercial applications, Sullivan corrected carefully, unwilling to claim the moral high ground his actions hadn't earned. Current operations represent necessary compromise toward establishing infrastructure essential for longer-term objectives. Sonya studied him with a penetrating assessment that seemed to reach past practiced defenses to the complicated truth beneath. Elisabeth mentioned you possess the moral compass Sebastian lacked, though perhaps not yet fully developed. I'm beginning to understand her observation. The reference to his aunt's ghostly assessment created momentary disorientation Sullivan concealed behind professional composure. That Sonya had engaged in detailed conversation with Whispering Pine's spectral inhabitants during his absence represented significant development requiring careful consideration. Elisabeth maintained an optimistic assessment of human potential, despite considerable evidence suggesting otherwise, he observed, neither confirming nor denying her spiritual insight, a quality that occasionally interfered with realistic evaluation of strategic necessity. Yet you maintain her gardens decades after her death, Sonya noted, an unexpected observation revealing perception beyond operational analysis, suggesting her influence transcends mere strategic consideration despite your professional terminology. The insight struck with uncomfortable accuracy, revealing patterns Sullivan had never consciously examined. Before he could formulate a response balancing truth against self-protection, the telephone rang again, a single sharp sound cutting through the growing tension between them. Sonya glanced toward the instrument, then back to Sullivan with a raised eyebrow. Morrison, with afterthoughts regarding our conversation? Unlikely, Sullivan replied, operational awareness reasserting itself. The private line rings twice in succession for Morrison. Single ring suggests an alternative caller, likely an operational associate requiring guidance regarding Hamburg transfer. You should answer, Sonya suggested, echoing her garden statement with similar recognition of professional obligation despite personal complications. I'll begin consideration of strategic approaches for Morrison's afternoon visit. The calm assertion of partnership, an operational alliance acknowledging mutual interest despite incomplete trust, carried weight beyond its simple words. Sullivan found himself appreciating her capacity for compartmentalization that mirrored his professional discipline while suggesting emotional complexity beyond mere calculated positioning. As the telephone rang again, Sonya remained where she stood, a curious transformation overtaking her expression. The composed mask she'd maintained during the conversation with Morrison gave way to something more vibrant, a flush of color in her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes, a subtle shift in her breathing pattern suggesting a physiological response beyond conscious control. Are you all right? Sullivan asked, momentarily concerned by this unexpected change. Perfectly, she replied, her voice carrying an unfamiliar vibrancy. I've spent weeks as a passive observer in operations others orchestrated around me. Gregory investigating historical conspiracies, you managing my containment, Morrison monitoring my movements. Her smile carried genuine warmth despite the tension underlying their circumstances. Taking direct action proves remarkably invigorating. Sullivan recognized the sensation she described, the clarity following decisive action, the momentary euphoria of seizing control within chaotic circumstances. He'd experienced similar response during particularly complex railway operations, though never acknowledged its emotional underpinnings beneath professional execution. Morrison appeared genuinely affected by your intervention, he observed, analytical mind still processing their interaction, while the telephone continued its insistent summons. His typical control was momentarily compromised by an unexpected confrontation from someone he's been observing from a distance since your arrival in Yorkshire. Perhaps even longer, Sonya suggested, her eyes bright with residual adrenaline from the high-stakes conversation. If he is indeed my father, as we both suspect, a biological reality carrying significant implications regarding his potential actions this afternoon, Sullivan noted, strategic assessment continuing despite growing awareness of Sonya's unusual energy. His interest in you likely transcends mere operational management, creating both vulnerability and potential advantage during negotiations. "I'm tired of talking about Morrison," Sonya said suddenly, her directness catching Sullivan momentarily off guard. "I'm tired of analyzing strategic implications and operational variables and potential advantages." She crossed the distance between them with unexpected purpose, physical proximity triggering instinctive alertness. Sullivan couldn't entirely attribute to professional caution. Whatever calculation he might have expected, whatever strategic positioning he might have anticipated, nothing prepared him for what happened next. Sonya's hands found his collar, drawing him down with a gentle insistence that bypassed conscious resistance. Her lips met his with startling certainty, not tentative exploration, but decisive, claiming that rendered strategic calculation momentarily irrelevant. The kiss lasted mere seconds, yet contained complexity, transcending its brief duration. Acknowledgement of attraction, previously constrained by circumstances. Assertion of control beyond reactive positioning. Perhaps even celebration of survival within dangerous currents neither had anticipated navigating together. When she pulled away, her eyes held his with remarkable steadiness, despite the boldness of her action. Sometimes, the direct approach proves more efficient than endless strategic calculation, she observed, voice slightly breathless yet carrying unmistakable certainty. A lesson both Morrison and you might occasionally benefit from considering. Before Sullivan could formulate response balancing stunned appreciation against professional composure, Sonya stepped back, reclaiming appropriate distance with the same decisive efficiency with which she had initially abolished it. "You should answer that," she said, nodding toward the persistently ringing telephone. "I'll begin preparations for Morrison's visit, while you manage operational necessities." The slight smile touching her lips carried both acknowledgement of their shared moment and recognition of continuing professional obligations. "We can discuss altered parameters of our alliance when you've concluded your business call." With that remarkable combination of personal boldness and professional courtesy, she turned and left the study, posture straight, steps measured, composure reinstated despite the emotional earthquake she had just initiated between them. Sullivan remained momentarily frozen, mind struggling to process what had just occurred. The kiss represented a tactical vulnerability that no strategic planning would have voluntarily incorporated, yet it somehow felt more authentic than any calculated interaction preceding it. The contradiction defied immediate resolution, creating disorientation that his professional discipline struggled to accommodate. The telephone's continued ringing provided a welcome anchor to operational reality amid emotional turbulence. Sullivan reached for the receiver with a hand that remained remarkably steady despite internal upheaval, compartmentalization reasserting itself through years of practiced discipline. "Von Vogel," he stated, voice betraying nothing of the seismic shifts occurring beneath his carefully maintained control. "Proceed with transfer protocols as established. Authorization confirmed." Business continued despite personal transformation. Railway operations proceeded according to schedule, while Sullivan's internal landscape underwent reconstruction, which his strategic planning had never anticipated, and no operational contingency had adequately prepared him to address. Sonya Matthews fundamentally altered their relationship through action transcending mere strategic positioning. Whatever awaited during Morrison's afternoon visit would unfold against an emotional backdrop neither had incorporated into their respective calculations. For once, Sullivan von Vogel found himself operating without a comprehensive strategic framework, a vulnerability that should have triggered professional concern yet somehow created an exhilarating possibility his carefully constructed existence had never previously permitted him to consider.